What do you think? I mean, it's a weird set of questions, but then again, that's an indicator of a weird set of readers, and I suppose that's to be expected.
Yeah, well, some very niche ones. I was like, what is he even going to say about these things? Like, what is this? Hi, everybody. My name is Taryn DeVere, and Simon has kindly asked me to come along and be the voice of his subscribers in this little interview, where I'm going to be asking Simon some of the questions that you submitted to him about himself and about his work and about the gist. So are we ready to jump in, Simon? Yeah?
Please do.
Yeah, okay. So question number one, what do you gain from writing the gist?
Yes. So mostly I gain the pleasure of writing, first of all, because I get to think about a topic and I have an excuse for thinking about a topic and trying to come up with sort of words around it. And I also have recently gained the pleasure of having people say they liked what they read, which, you know, is nice. But also, I think the most interesting new thing that the format of the gist has produced is that because it's an email newsletter as opposed to a blog, which I used to write for years, you end up with the same people reading it every week. So you can get an issue where a blog gets a lot of hits, but there are new people each time. There's not a lot of overlap from one week to the other. So by building up that kind of one-to-one relationship between the writer and the reader, that's really interesting. People have feedback about not just this week's thoughts, but how they fit into the other weeks as well. So I suppose that's what I get out of it, a sense of satisfaction.
So it's more about it's building a relationship with your readers in a way that you haven't done before. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, and of course I hope to be persuasive in making my argument, but if I can't be persuasive, at least entertaining.
Okay, well, I think you succeeded that, Simon. Okay, the next question is a little bit of a technical one. I don't really understand this question, so I hope the way you answer this is going to enlighten me and maybe some readers. So can you speak to the EPR directive? What is it, and do you consider it to be robust?
Okay, so the query here is the EPR directive is the ePrivacy regulation, and it is the thing that makes the cookie pop-ups appear on everybody's website. It's the law that says, yes, we have to agree to cookies. Now, I don't think there's probably a single person in the world who doesn't hate the pop-ups, the cookie pop-ups, and they never work and they never remember your choices, and they always ask you every time you come back, and they're maddening. And I suppose my position is that they are maddening, but they are better than the alternative, because the United States doesn't have any kind of restrictions on cookies, which are actually about tracking and tracing and surveillance of the individual. And what has happened there is that you see innumerable security breaches in respect of data, but you also see what are known as data brokers building up, where you end up with creatures like Equifax, where they build up a bunch of data bought from other companies about one person, and they centralize all that information. And you end up with a profile which doesn't just have your banking details and doesn't just have your credit score, but will also say, what magazines do these people go to? Where do they visit on the internet? What do they see? Which of the pages on Amazon that they visited? That kind of a profile ends up being obviously invaluable if you want to advertise something to someone, but also it means that they have a really clear picture of who this person is. Maria, I doubt that we're all as two-dimensional as our internet selves, but nonetheless, it is an aspect of ourselves. But that they also create a kind of a well of information about you, which is then commercialized and sold. And that's they are a broker, so they trade in that information. That entire field is illegal under EU law. And the ePrivacy regulation was meant to be replaced. It's kind of clunky. It's very old. It predates the GDPR for years. And it was meant to be replaced. And it is that replacement was the most lobbied piece of legislation the EU has ever made. And it has never advanced to the point of actually becoming legislation, which is why we're still left with this rather clunky, not quite fit for purpose version that has pop-ups everywhere. So we could replace the pop-ups, but keep the same rights. In all likelihood, what we're going to end up with is taking a lot of the things that were in that draft piece of legislation that wasn't able to be used, couldn't get through the process, and we're going to stuff them into a revision of the GDPR in probably 3 to 5 years. So we'll probably get the benefit of it in that time. And in the meantime, we're plowing through an awful lot of clicky pop-ups. But I ask you to have forbearance, because annoying though they are better than the alternative.
Okay, all right. I think you've answered that question. So the next one from this same reader is, what was the case relating to Google and people's visits to abortion clinics? And how does that connect to people enabling or disabling their location history on Google?
Well, these are specialist questions. Okay, short one on this one. So what happens is that, as I say, you get brokers, but you also get sort of centralization of information when you've got a creature like Google, which has Android phones, and also you get there was a whole question around period trackers and cycle trackers, where it became suddenly clear to people, once it was possible that getting an abortion could be criminalized, it became suddenly clear to people that they were storing and collecting information which could then be used against them. Yeah. And one such piece of information was, did you visit, were you in the location which was an abortion clinic at a certain time? And the phone is a tracker, a geographical tracker, and it can reveal that information. But it doesn't just live on your phone. Google has it back in its server. So even if you threw your phone in a river, the information would still be available and could be got with a warrant by an assiduous local law enforcement person. The other problem was that you also might have cycle tracking, which would show a break, which might indicate by way of evidence that there was a pregnancy, and then would show the cycle reestablishing again and that the pregnancy ended. And people realized that this perhaps wasn't information they wanted, sort of not only in their own, like it's not like it was written in a notebook that just lives in your house. It was also in the cloud. It was in a place where a warrant could be served for that information if a case was being built against an individual. We probably ought not to build dossiers of evidence which could be used against us. So by not having privacy by design in these organizations' apps and the software that they're offering to people, you end up creating hazards which otherwise wouldn't be there. And as I say, privacy by design is required under EU law, but it isn't under US law. And so an awful lot of those troubles came from a lack of privacy by design in those kinds of things. And encryption would also be good there as well. So that's my technical answer to those technical questions.
Okay, all right. One other slightly less complex, I think, but still kind of in this area of GDPR stuff. In your opinion, are there other such underreported and underexplored corners of GDPR, following on from the previous?
Yeah,
question?
okay. I'd say probably the thing that's sort of interesting at the moment that's coming up that we haven't really seen a lot of discussion about is a proposal from the European Commission to build in a legal requirement to survey and track everything that we upload onto the internet, so that you would have to create like an oversight body inside a company, or it might be inside law enforcement. That's not clear yet, but that it's called Chat Control 2.0, and it would hey, I don't name them. I just tell you what it's got. Is what it's at. And it would control interactions between in the public sphere of the internet and what could and couldn't be said. Now, for obvious reasons, it's being presented as a safety measure, and safety is good, but it also has obvious consequences in terms of ability to say things which might be politically unwelcome. And across, even inside the EU, there are jurisdictions where speech is constrained. When we think of Hungary, for example, or Poland, and where there are risks and restrictions already on speech in other media, be they state broadcast and so on. And the internet is a place by which people can express actual things unfiltered, And that's critical for creating a public sphere for a democracy. So I don't think it's being presented particularly well. I don't think it's been thought out. But of course, the major problem with it is if you're going to surveil all the communications through the internet, you've got to break encryption to do it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to survey them. And that is really where the trouble will start on that one. And it's what killed Chat Control 1.0 was the proposal to break encryption. So I suspect that if we end up seeing a conversation about it, it will mean that things have gone awry for its proposers.
Okay. All right. Moving on to our next question. Would you describe yourself as a campaigner or an activist?
No, I don't think I would. I think what I would say is that first of all, I have a capacity to argue things, and I think it's important that every citizen should use their capacity to improve the lives of all the other citizens that they share the space with, share their country with. And so a campaigner suggests that it's like a special activity that you might do. But in fact, I feel that it's part of the everyday life of being a citizen, that you would advance positions, and other people can advance their counter positions, but that you would advance positions as persuasively as you can. And occasionally I will do that, with a bit of exertion, where I'd have to step out from beyond just writing about something. And you have to try and voice those positions publicly. But I try not to do that if someone else is already doing it. Someone else's problem, then great. But it's where you find that perhaps there's something which is particular requirements in terms of experience or skill or knowledge, and that you think, well, I could contribute here. That's the moment where I probably step out of just writing an essay, and I try and be more than just persuasive, and I try and affect some change. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, you never know. But it has worked more often than not.
So you're trying to affect change, but you don't define that as activism, no?
No, because I think everybody wants to see things better. And if you're presented with an issue, I can't imagine where someone would say, well, I have a feeling about this, but I'm certainly not going to tell anyone about it. After all, whether we're only trying to persuade our families or we're trying to persuade a country, it's the same idea. We've got a position as citizens, and we just think we're just going to advance our opinion and see if we can persuade other people. It doesn't seem like activism. If anything, it's active citizenry. And if you don't have an active citizenry, then you don't have a healthy democracy.
Okay. All right. So this is the next question. You write the gist, it could be said, I'm sorry, I have to just jump in here and say that I have like a kind of verbal dyslexia where I keep getting gist and gist mixed up.
That is okay. That is okay. I can't write the word library. I can't spell.
But you have to just forgive me if I say it.
That is all right. I am okay.
Okay, otherwise, my whole conversation with you will just be me going through my head going, it's gist. Saying
Jif lemon.
Just, you write the gist, it could be said, to provide a different perspective to that which one might find in traditional media sources. To what extent do you think that Ireland has a healthy media climate, one that holds power to account?
That's an interesting one, isn't it? And it's interesting.
Awaiting your answer to this. I'm
because so first of all, there's a presumption in the question that I see it as a deliberate alternative. As I say, if everybody else thought the same way, that would be excellent, because then I wouldn't have to persuade anyone of anything. So it's that these are my opinions, and no doubt other people have theirs, and sometimes there's overlap between individuals and sometimes there's difference. But I wouldn't consider it to be this exists because I'm not happy with what other media outlets there are. After all, it's a pretty thin media outlet just to have one person telling you what they think. It is, however, I think a perfectly good idea if you think about it as like a column. In days gone by, you would have had a news sheet where you'd have a mixture of opinion and information. And I think that's probably the model that it most closely represents. And it does come out of that blogging kind of background from, I suppose, now Tuppensworth, which is 2001. So what's that, 20 years of doing it? So you do end up with a certain kind of style, whether you recognize that you're developing it or not. But I'm avoiding the other half of the question, which I suppose we'll have a look at, which is, does Ireland have a healthy media ecosystem?
Yeah.
I think it is not as healthy as it once was.
Oh, really?
I think that it is slipping, and I think there are financial and cultural reasons for that. I think, first of all, if you look at RTE, RTE has always had a difficulty straddling the impossible chasm that it's asked to stand with one foot on the other. One is based on advertising and keeping commercial interests happy, and one is based on keeping the government happy from state funding. And if you're going to stand with one foot on both sides of that chasm, you find yourself, institutionally inhibited from being able to address certain things. Not that the journalists in RTE necessarily feel this, because that's an editorial question, but that corporately, an institution is always going to feel those pressures. I have, as you know, I have actually republished my grandfather and Lelia Doolan and Bob Quinn's jointly written book about this, called Sit Down and Be Counted. And I have to say that the analysis that they did 50 years ago still rings true. There is an inherent problem in not bringing RTE under fully state-funded position. And that problem leaves the station, A, starved of funds, but also B, starved of the autonomy that it could and should have in order to be able to cover a much wider range of topics and interests. There you go. That's on that side. And in terms of print, well,
that's nationalized media. So, there are other media sources.
Yeah. So then we have a question of, well, the thing that we have always thought of as Irish media has grown. There are more outlets. So, a couple of years ago, the Journal, for example, signed up to join the Press Council, which at the time it hadn't allowed anybody online to join the Press Council before that. Yeah. So, that was one. And then you've got lots of independent outlets appearing. And I suppose the Gist is an independent outlet, if you wanted to call it that. But I'm really thinking of, things like the Tortoise Shack and the podcasts. I mean, Vicky's podcast on the police. I mean, that was an in-depth investigation, lasting episode after episode by someone intimately expert on it. You couldn't have asked for better from any media outlet. And so
held power to account, that podcast did. But I think this question is more relating to sort of traditional media sources and kind of well-funded media sources. Do you think that they hold power to account in the way that they should?
You've got to think about it in terms of there being layers. So there are individuals who work inside newspapers who absolutely do a fantastic job. And you could hardly open a newspaper and tell me that this newspaper has nothing of value in it. After all, lots of people do lots of work inside a newspaper. Editorially, however, the readership of newspapers have got older, and the editorial line, follows the readers. And if you look at that as being the sort of the underlying cause of some of the strange behaviors that we've seen, that you're basically dealing with an older readership, and therefore you're trying to find stories that an old readership enjoys and was happy to read, it kind of makes sense as to the way some of the way print media has drifted. I mean, you'll frequently see occasions now where the story that's the front of a website for a newspaper is nowhere to be found on the front page of that newspaper. The print and the website are drifting apart as products, and yet they are still the subject to the same editorial lines and the same editorial decisions. So the web product can never actually chase the audience that it might want to or might be aimed at, simply because it's always going to be the secondary product of the primary product, which is the paper.
Yeah, although interestingly, I noticed that the Independent will release their stories online before they do them in the paper.
They will, but the question is, will they release stories online that never appear in the paper?
Yeah.
Because then you really have got a separate editorial stream going.
Yeah.
It's not about the timing, it's about what is this story, and the people who are going to read it in the paper are going to read it in the paper anyway, whether it was online 20 minutes ago or not. The real question is, are you writing for an audience, or that is an online audience, or are you still writing for a print audience?
Yeah, that's true. They are two completely different audiences, aren't they?
And at the moment, for practical reasons as much as anything else, because you have to physically ship newspapers around the country. So you have to, when you're writing for a print audience, that's the editorial that comes first. That's the editorial viewpoint that gets served. And the online audience sort of gets the reheated leftovers from the print effort.
Well, you've raised some interesting things. We could talk on and on about that, but I'm going to go on to the last and final question here. To what extent do you see the gist, and by extension your Twitter feed, as fulfilling a function that other outlets should be providing? I guess it follows on a bit from the last question.
I don't think it does that, because it's just my voice, and other outlets have other people's voices. And otherwise it would be a demand that everybody says the same thing I say, and I don't hold that demand in the slightest. And so the things that I say and think are not, this is not a world where I am confident I'm right about everything. Indeed, quite the opposite. And I always try and approach writing a gist as a project in me trying to understand what I think about a subject. So there are some subjects where I don't have any ideas about them. I just don't know, or I don't care, or it doesn't grab me, or I have nothing interesting or useful or original to say. And this is why some weeks there's no gist, because that's when I can't think of anything to say.
Yeah, okay. I don't have an opinion about any of this week's news.
Yeah. Or, well, I mean, I might have an opinion, but it's pedestrian, and maybe it's the same opinion everybody's had. So why send it to people and tell them the things they already have? So what you're looking for, I hope, is something new, something either original, or to juxtapose things which have not been put together in a way where each one sheds new light on the other. That's the mode and model, I suppose.
Well, clearly your readers, and I'm one of them, think that, you should be maybe a little bit more featured in the more mainstream media outlets, and because we like your opinions a lot. So, I think that's maybe a nice note to end things on, unless you have anything else you want to add.
No. I mean, this here was an experiment all by itself, because we asked the paying members to produce the questions, and then we're going to release the video to everybody. And so a special thank you to all the people who do pay, and whether they pay €2 a month or €7 a month, depending on what they can afford. A special thank you to everybody who does pay, because it means that we can, I sit down and I know I'm doing this. I can cover the costs of the hosting. I can't really justify the time, but I like it so much that I can't not do it. So it really does give me the spur.
Paid for your time, are you? It's not really covering your time.
No, not if I was charging at professional rates. As I say, sometimes you want to try and improve the lot of the world. Sometimes you just want to entertain people. Sometimes you've had an idea and you want to tell people that. I mean, I'm really grateful that people are interested in hearing and reading about those things that pop into the back of my head. But if they didn't read and want to read about it, that would be okay too. Everybody has, everybody can make their own decisions on that. So I'm just thrilled when something works.
Simon, how can people get your newsletter to their inbox? Where do they go? What do they do?
Well, if they don't know and they're watching this, something's gone wrong terribly. But if they go to thegist.ie, it'll ask them, would you like to subscribe? And they can say yes for free or yes for money. And both, the subscription will be successful in both cases. And I'd be delighted if they did. That'd be brilliant.
Amazing. And where can people find you otherwise to get in touch?
If ever you want to send me a message, it's tupped, TUPP_ED, just to make life difficult, at on Twitter. And that's probably the easiest way. Send me a DM and I'll see it. Or you can send an email to simon@datacomplianceeurope.eu, but that's an awful lot of typing. I mean, what do you think? And it's a funny one. I think I'm going to stick it up and we'll tell people it's there, and sure, we'll see how they think.